That night, I stood less than 48 hours away from becoming a husband, and merely a few seconds away from uncovering a secret capable of shattering my entire world. If I had turned the doorknob a moment sooner, I would never have overheard those devastating words. But fate kept me motionless behind that cold hallway wall, while my fiancée confessed something to her mother that I was never meant to hear. For over 2 years, I genuinely believed my life was complete. My name is Andrew. I am 35 years old, and I spent the better part of a decade building a technology firm from the ground up in Austin, Texas. I was not born into wealth or privilege. I grew up in a modest neighborhood where every victory was earned through hard labor, resilience, and sacrifice. During my college years, I worked late shifts at local diners, slept briefly on office couches, and willingly gave up countless moments of leisure to pursue a singular dream. When my enterprise finally began to achieve stability and national recognition, I foolishly assumed that the most difficult trials of my life were behind me. Then Victoria entered my world. We met during an autumn charity gala held at a prominent downtown hotel, organized to raise funds for a regional children's hospital. She was undeniably elegant, exceptionally intelligent, and possessed a rare gift for making anyone she conversed with feel extraordinarily valued. While many individuals in my professional circle seemed focused solely on my financial standing or commercial success, Victoria consistently spoke of her admiration for my grounded nature, my quiet humility, and the kindness with which I treated others. Her gentle compliments touched a quiet, lonely part of my spirit that had been neglected for many years. We began dating shortly after that evening, and the months passed with surprising speed. She integrated seamlessly into my personal life, forming warm relationships with my close friends, my younger sister, and even asking to visit the small suburban house where my late mother had spent her final years. Victoria always appeared deeply moved by the stories of my modest upbringing, often whispering that she had never encountered a man of such unyielding integrity. When I eventually dropped to one knee on a quiet coastal overlook and asked her to be my wife, she wept tears of joy and embraced me tightly. At least, that was what everyone present believed. The wedding preparations moved forward at a frantic pace. The grand ballroom was reserved, her designer dress was customized, and formal wedding invitations arrived daily from across the country. My senior corporate partners repeatedly remarked that this would undoubtedly be the wedding of the year. I was entirely convinced that I was stepping into the most fulfilling chapter of my existence. On the evening preceding our formal rehearsal ceremony, I departed my corporate office much later than intended. As I drove through the quiet, tree-lined streets toward the hotel where I was scheduled to stay, adhering to a traditional custom of staying apart before the wedding, I suddenly remembered that I had left a crucial leather folder containing sensitive corporate documents on the study desk at the house I shared with Victoria. Realizing I would need those papers early the following morning, I took a detour, intending to slip inside quietly, retrieve the folder, and depart without disturbing her sleep. I unlocked the front entrance using my key with extreme care, stepping into the dimly lit foyer without making a sound. The hallway lights were off, though a soft golden glow radiated from the kitchen counter at the end of the corridor. I immediately heard Victoria's voice. She was laughing lightly, evidently engaged in a telephone conversation. Not wishing to interrupt her late-night call, I took 2 quiet steps toward the central staircase. However, just as my foot reached the bottom step, a single sentence echoed down the hallway, causing my legs to freeze completely in place. "Mother, please, just hold on for 2 more days," Victoria said. Her tone was utterly unrecognizable. The warmth, gentleness, and soft tenderness she always used when speaking to me had vanished entirely. In its place was a voice that sounded cold, calculating, and completely devoid of emotion. I frowned in dark confusion, remaining motionless in the shadow of the staircase. "Once the wedding paperwork is officially finalized, she continued with a quiet chuckle. "Neither of us will ever have to worry about money again." A heavy, suffocating sensation immediately settled into my chest. I knew that overhearing private conversations was fundamentally wrong, yet an overwhelming instinct bound me to the floor, warning me that my entire reality was hanging in the balance. My pulse raced as I waited, praying that I had somehow misunderstood her words. Then came the sentence that shattered my soul. "He actually believes I am deeply in love with him," Victoria said softly into the receiver. But I could never truly love a man like Andrew. The air seemed to evaporate from my lungs in an instant. For several excruciating seconds, I stood frozen, convincing myself that my ears were playing an elaborate trick on me. Perhaps she was discussing a character from a movie, or making an inside joke with an old acquaintance. I desperately sought any logical explanation to shield my heart from the crushing truth. But the words that followed systematically obliterated every lingering shred of hope I possessed. "He is far too naive," Victoria murmured, her voice carrying a light, dismissive laugh. It was embarrassingly easy to make him trust me from the very beginning. I leaned my hand heavily against the wooden wall to keep my knees from buckling. The woman I was scheduled to marry in less than 48 hours was standing a few yards away, mocking my affection and ridiculing my trust. A suffocating lump formed in my throat, as 2 years of cherished memories flooded my mind in rapid succession. I remembered our first vacation together in the mountains, the heartfelt handwritten letters she used to leave on my desk, and the quiet late-night conversations where we talked endlessly about building a family and growing old together. Every tender look, every gentle touch, and every tearful promise had been nothing more than a meticulously crafted performance. My initial instinct was to burst into the kitchen, demand an immediate explanation, and confront her betrayal head-on. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to end the charade right then and there. Yet a deeper, more rational voice urged me to remain motionless. I needed to know how far this deceit extended. I needed to understand the true depth of the trap that had been set around me. Victoria continued speaking with absolute composure, as though discussing a routine business transaction. "Once we sign the final registry documents, everything becomes significantly easier. His legal team won't be able to contest a thing." My breathing became shallow and fast. What registry documents was she referring to? I mentally scanned through every piece of paperwork associated with our upcoming nuptials: the prenuptial agreement, the joint asset arrangements, and the property deeds. For the first time, isolated events from the past few months began to lock together like pieces of a dark puzzle. I recalled how persistently she had suggested switching to a new legal consultancy firm, how eagerly she had offered to review certain financial disclosures herself, and how frequently she casually inquired about the voting rights and equity structure of my software enterprise. What I had previously viewed as genuine interest in my life's work was actually a calculated reconnaissance. On the other end of the line, her mother appeared to ask a question. Victoria let out a low, cold laugh, a sharp sound I had never heard her utter during our entire relationship. "Do not worry about him, Mother," she replied smoothly. "He doesn't suspect a single thing. He is so utterly blinded by his affection that he would willingly sign his own execution order if I handed him the pen with a smile." I felt as though the foundation of my life was collapsing into an endless abyss. Yet, just as I thought I had endured the absolute worst of her betrayal, Victoria lowered her voice to a chilling whisper, pronouncing words that turned the blood in my veins to solid ice. "And if everything goes according to the plan Stephen designed, Andrew is going to lose far more than just his financial fortune." The name Stephen echoed relentlessly in my mind like a physical blow. I had no knowledge of anyone named Stephen in her immediate circle, nor did I understand what terrifying scheme they had crafted against me. But one reality was crystal clear. Victoria was not merely an opportunistic woman seeking financial security. She was an active participant in a malicious conspiracy aimed at destroying my life. In that quiet hallway, surrounded by the shadows of a house I thought was my home, I made a crucial decision. I would not confront her tonight. If I confronted her now without concrete proof, she would offer practiced tears, concoct elaborate lies, or notify her co-conspirator to erase their tracks. To uncover the full extent of their plot, I had to suppress my agonizing pain and pretend to be the same trusting, devoted fool she believed me to be. I closed my eyes, took 3 deep, controlled breaths, and slowly stepped backward toward the front entrance. I quietly opened the heavy oak door, then slammed it firmly shut, allowing the sound to resonate through the residence to signal my arrival. "Sweetheart?" I called out from the entryway, forcing my voice to sound warm and completely unbothered. A few moments later, Victoria stepped out of the kitchen with a bright, radiant smile, slipping her mobile phone effortlessly into her cardigan pocket. "Oh my goodness! You scared me!" she exclaimed gently, walking toward me. "I thought you were already settled in at the hotel for the night." She reached up to wrap her arms around my neck and kiss my cheek. Although every nerve in my body revolted against her touch, I forced myself to endure the embrace, holding her firmly, while keeping my face impassive. "I forgot the legal folder for tomorrow's meeting," I answered, managing a calm, reassuring smile. "I just ran in to grab it." Victoria reached up and gently stroked my cheek, with a tenderness that now struck me as thoroughly horrific. "You work entirely too hard, Andrew," she murmured softly, her eyes beaming with apparent affection. "After the wedding ceremony is over, I am going to make sure you take a long, restful vacation away from that office." I nodded slowly, holding back the wave of disgust rising in my chest. While she rambled on about the final arrangements for the floral centerpieces, the seating chart for the reception dinner, and the arrival of out-of-town guests, I could only stare into her eyes and wonder how many of her smiles over the past 2 years had been calculated acts of deception. "I should get back to the hotel," I said, picking up the leather folder from the study desk. "We both need our rest for tomorrow's rehearsal." "Of course, my love," she replied, kissing my cheek once more before watching me step out into the cool night air. That night, sleep was entirely impossible. I spent the dark hours pacing the floor of my hotel room, meticulously reviewing every legal contract, corporate partnership agreement, and financial statement associated with my company. To the untrained eye, everything appeared standard and legally sound. However, I knew that whatever Stephen and Victoria had engineered was subtle, dangerous, and deeply hidden within the fine print. I recognized that I could not fight this battle alone. I needed professional assistance immediately. At 7 o'clock the following morning, I placed a telephone call to Mark, a close friend from my university days, who now operated one of the most respected private intelligence and investigation agencies in Texas. We agreed to meet at a discreet, secluded coffee shop, located miles away from the commercial district. When Mark arrived and sat across from me, I laid out every detail of the previous night: the phone call, Victoria's cold demeanor, the mention of the registry documents, and the mystery man named Stephen. Mark listened in total silence, his expression growing increasingly stern as I spoke. "Are you absolutely certain of what you heard, Andrew?" Mark asked gravely, leaning over the table. "This is an extraordinary allegation against the woman you are about to marry." "I wish with all my heart that I had misheard her," I replied, my voice trembling slightly. "But there is zero doubt in my mind. She was laughing about my trust, Mark. She said I would lose far more than my fortune." Mark took a slow sip of his coffee and let out a heavy sigh. "If there is a third party involved and a coordinated effort to undermine your corporate assets, my team will find the paper trail. But I need you to do something extraordinarily difficult over the next 24 hours. "What is that?" I asked. "You must act like the happiest, most unsuspecting groom on the planet," Mark instructed firmly. "If Victoria, or her associates, catch even a hint that you are suspicious, they will retreat, alter their strategy, or cover their tracks before we can gather ironclad evidence. Can you play that role? I have to, I answered without hesitation. For the remainder of that agonizing day, I forced myself to perform the ultimate act of theatrical composure. I attended the final tuxedo fitting, laughing alongside my groomsmen as they cracked jokes about married life. I greeted my relatives arriving at the airport, offering warm hugs to aunts, uncles, and cousins who had traveled across the country to celebrate my joy. I answered dozens of phone calls from well-wishing friends, business associates, and acquaintances, repeatedly expressing my excitement for the upcoming ceremony. Throughout every moment of this public spectacle, Victoria continued to play the role of the devoted, glowing bride with breathtaking skill. Whenever she stood beside me in front of our families, holding my arm and resting her head gently against my shoulder, I felt a hollow, sickening emptiness inside. Every laughter shared among our guests felt like an echo in a tragic play, where only Mark and I knew the true script. Late that afternoon, while I was sitting alone in my hotel room attempting to catch my breath, my mobile phone vibrated on the nightstand. It was an encrypted message from Mark. "We found something significant," the text read. "Meet me at the secure office immediately." I grabbed my coat and drove across the city, my heart hammering against my ribs. When I stepped into Mark's private office, he had several large physical file folders spread across a wide glass table, along with high-definition photographic prints. We started by running a comprehensive background investigation on Victoria's past contacts, Mark said quietly, pulling a primary photograph toward the center of the table. It didn't take long to identify Stephen. I stared down at the photograph. It showed Victoria entering an upscale Italian restaurant on the outskirts of the city a week prior. Sitting at a secluded corner table was a sharply dressed man in his early 40s, with slicked-back hair and a calculating demeanor. "His name is Stephen Medina," Mark explained, pointing to the man in the picture. "And 4 years ago, before Victoria ever met you, they were intimately involved." I stared at the image, feeling a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Mark reached into the folder and slid another photograph across the glass surface. This image was far more damning. It captured Victoria and Stephen standing near the side exit of a luxury downtown hotel, locked in a passionate kiss. The timestamp displayed at the bottom of the photo indicated it had been taken exactly 6 days ago. The very afternoon, Victoria had claimed to be shopping for her bridal veil with her mother. "Stephen Medina is a disgraced corporate strategist," Mark explained calmly, handing me a secondary profile document. 5 years ago, he was investigated for orchestrated bankruptcy fraud and predatory corporate acquisitions. He specializes in targeting growing middle-market firms, using personal relationships and backroom legal maneuvering to strip founders of their equity. My hands shook as I held the photographs. The reality of my entire relationship was unraveling before my eyes. While Victoria was trying on wedding rings with me, choosing white roses, and whispering vows of eternal devotion, she was spending her afternoons in hotel rooms with her former lover, planning my financial execution. "There is more," Mark said, placing an encrypted USB flash drive onto the desk. "One of my specialized digital intelligence operatives managed to capture an audio transmission from a meeting Stephen held yesterday afternoon with a rogue corporate attorney." Mark connected the flash drive to his laptop and hit play. Static filled the room for a few brief seconds, followed by the clear, unmistakable voice of Stephen Medina. "Once the marriage certificate is signed and registered tomorrow evening," Stephen's recorded voice resonated clearly through the speakers, "Victoria will present the Consolidated Asset Management Agreement under the guise of an estate planning portfolio. Andrew is so hopelessly enamored with her that he won't even hire an independent auditor to review the secondary schedules." A second male voice on the recording spoke up. And what if his internal board members raise questions about the holding entity in the Cayman Islands? Stephen let out a sharp, arrogant laugh. They won't have time to react. The moment Andrew signs those secondary transfer documents, voting control over 60% of his firm's software patents automatically shifts to our shell corporation. By the time his legal team realizes what happened, the assets will be liquidated and transferred out of the jurisdiction. Andrew will be left with an empty corporate shell and insurmountable debt. The recording continued, detailing how Victoria was to receive a 25% cut of the liquidated proceeds, while her mother's personal debts would be completely erased by Stephen. Every word was delivered with chilling casualness, as if my 10 years of grueling labor were nothing more than a simple harvest waiting to be reaped. I reached out and slammed the laptop shut, unable to endure another second of his arrogant voice. My blood ran cold, but beneath the overwhelming grief, a fiery spark of clarity began to ignite within me. Mark looked at me with deep concern and empathy. "Andrew, you have more than enough evidence right now to cancel the wedding, file a police report, and file a civil restraining order against both of them. We can inform the authorities tonight." I stood up and walked toward the window, looking out over the glowing skyline of Austin. "If I cancel the wedding quietly tonight, Mark, do you know what will happen?" "They will flee?" Mark asked. "Worse," I replied, turning back to face him. "Victoria and her mother will spin a masterclass of lies to the media, our friends, and my family. They will claim I panicked, that I had a mental breakdown, or that I abandoned her at the altar out of cruelty. They will paint themselves as innocent victims, and Stephen will slip away quietly into the shadows to target another unsuspecting victim." Mark narrowed his eyes, sensing the shift in my tone. "What are you proposing, Andrew?" "I want them completely exposed," I said, my voice dropping to a firm, resolute whisper. "I want every single person who came to celebrate this fake union to see precisely who Victoria and Stephen really are. I want the evidence presented so clearly and publicly that no lawyer on earth can ever clean their reputations again." Mark leaned back in his chair, studying my face carefully before a subtle smile appeared on his lips. "If we are going to do this publicly at the cathedral tomorrow, we must make sure the trap is absolutely flawless. We cannot afford a single technical or legal error." "Then, let's get to work," I answered. Over the next 4 hours, Mark and I carefully constructed an airtight plan. Every piece of photographic evidence, every intercepted audio file, and every financial trace document was organized into a seamless digital presentation. Mark arranged for 2 of his plainclothes operatives to attend the ceremony, positioned near the exit doors to ensure Stephen Medina, who was planning to watch the proceedings quietly from the back pew, could not escape once the reveal began. That evening, I returned to our shared residence for one final, agonizing encounter. Victoria had prepared a quiet, candlelit dinner in the dining room, complete with high-end wine and soft background music. She was wearing a graceful silk dress, her eyes sparkling with what appeared to be pure romantic anticipation. "I wanted to give you a quiet moment before the madness of tomorrow begins," she said warmly, stepping forward to wrap her arms around my waist. "In less than 24 hours, my love, we will officially be husband and wife." I looked down into her eyes, searching for even a faint trace of genuine guilt or hesitation. There was none. Her performance was absolute, refined through months of practice. "I appreciate this, Victoria," I said, forcing a faint smile as I took my seat across from her. Throughout the meal, she held my hand across the table, speaking softly about our upcoming honeymoon in Europe, the family home we would build in the hills, and how much she admired my dedication to my work. Every word was a poison wrapped in honey. Whenever she raised her glass to toast our future, I clinked my glass against hers, repeating the words with quiet, double-edged precision. "To our real future," I murmured, "and to the truth coming to light." She laughed lightly, unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon. "To the truth," she agreed, sipping her wine. The following morning arrived under a clear, bright Texas sky. The grand cathedral in downtown Austin was decorated with hundreds of white roses, silk ribbons, and elaborate floral arrangements. By mid-afternoon, the pews were filled to capacity with over 200 guests, prominent tech investors, corporate partners, lifelong family friends, and relatives who had traveled long distances to witness our union. Inside the groom's private dressing chamber, I stood before the tall mirror, adjusting my black silk bow tie. My hands were completely steady. The agonizing pain that had gripped my heart 2 nights ago had transformed into an unshakable, ice-cold resolve. There was a soft knock at the door, and Samuel, my chief software engineer and longtime corporate mentor, stepped inside. Samuel was a silver-haired man in his late 50s, who had guided me through the hardest commercial struggles of my early career. "You look sharp, Andrew," Samuel said, stepping over to adjust my jacket shoulders with fatherly pride. "I remember when you were coding in a tiny garage with 2 broken chairs. Look at you now. You built an empire, and today you marry a wonderful woman." I looked at Samuel through the mirror, feeling a temporary pang of sadness for the innocent joy my friends were experiencing. "Thank you, Samuel. Your support over these years has meant everything to me. Just promise me that no matter what happens today, you will remember that our company was built on honesty." Samuel frowned slightly, puzzled by my serious tone. "Of course, son. Honesty is the foundation of everything we do." I reached into my inner jacket pocket and touched the cold, metallic surface of a small wireless remote control. It was connected directly to the church's high-definition projection system, a setup originally intended to show a romantic slideshow of our courtship during the post-ceremony reception. Mark's team had discreetly reconfigured the feed 2 hours prior. At 3 o'clock sharp, the solemn organ notes echoed throughout the cathedral, signaling the start of the processional. I stepped out onto the altar alongside my best man, turning to face the center aisle. Standing near the rear pews, wearing a subtle gray suit and trying to blend into the crowd, was Stephen Medina. He held a small leather portfolio under his arm, looking like a wolf, waiting for the shepherd to drop his guard. I caught his eye for a brief fraction of a second, offering a subtle, knowing nod before looking away. The heavy wooden double doors at the back of the cathedral swung open wide. A collective whisper of admiration drifted through the congregation as Victoria appeared, walking gracefully down the aisle on the arm of her father. She was breathtaking in her custom white gown, a long lace veil trailing behind her, carrying a bouquet of white orchids. Her mother sat in the front row, wiping away tears of apparent joy with a handkerchief. As Victoria reached the altar, her father placed her hand in mine. She looked up at me through her veil, her smile flawless and radiant. "You look handsome," she whispered softly. "And you look completely prepared," I replied quietly. The elderly priest raised his hands, inviting the congregation to be seated, and began the solemn ceremony, speaking eloquently about the sanctity of marriage, mutual sacrifice, and everlasting trust. The cathedral fell into a reverent hush as the priest turned to face us, opening the holy ledger to begin the traditional exchange of vows. Every eye in the church was fixed on the altar, waiting for the pivotal moment that would unite 2 lives forever. "Andrew," the priest spoke with a warm, resonant voice, "do you take Victoria to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, loving and cherishing her, until death do you part?" Silence enveloped the vast sanctuary. I took a deep, deliberate breath, looking directly into Victoria's eyes. She smiled softly, nodding slightly, as if urging me to speak the required words. Instead, I took a step back, gently releasing her hand. "Before I give my answer, Father," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the cathedral's sound system. "I believe there is something crucial that everyone gathered in this holy place needs to see and understand." A sudden wave of confused murmurs echoed through the pews. Guests turned to one another, whispering in surprise. The priest blinked, clearly taken aback by the departure from the traditional liturgy. "Andrew?" Victoria whispered, her smile faltering for the first time, a flicker of anxiety darting across her eyes. "What are you doing? This isn't part of the ceremony." "No, Victoria, it isn't," I replied calmly. I reached into my jacket, pulled out the sleek black remote control, and pressed the primary switch. From the vaulted ceiling above the altar, a massive motorized projection screen, installed for the evening reception, began to lower smoothly. At the same time, the overhead sanctuary lights dimmed slightly as the dual digital projectors hummed to life. "Andrew, stop this right now," Victoria's mother shouted from the front pew, standing up abruptly with a flushed face. "This is completely inappropriate." I ignored her completely. The first image flashed onto the giant screen in brilliant high definition. It was the clear, unmistakable photograph of Victoria, sitting at the secluded Italian restaurant with Stephen Medina, holding his hand across the table. A sharp gasp rippled through the congregation. Members of my corporate board leaned forward in utter shock, while Victoria's father stared at the screen in disbelief. "What is the meaning of this?" Victoria demanded, her voice rising in pitch as panic began to break through her pristine composure. "Andrew, turn that off." Before she could reach for the device, I pressed the second button. The next photograph appeared, a close-up, undeniable image of Victoria and Stephen kissing passionately outside the downtown hotel, time-stamped just 6 days prior. The church erupted into absolute chaos. Gasps, shocked cries, and loud murmuring filled the air. My groomsmen stood frozen, their eyes wide with disbelief, while Samuel shook his head in silent horror. Victoria's face turned completely ghost-white. She reached out to touch my arm, her fingers trembling violently. "Andrew, please, I can explain. It isn't what it looks like. He was just an old friend." "Is he just an old friend, Victoria?" I asked quietly, my voice utterly cold. "Let's hear how you describe him in your own words." I pressed the third button on the remote. The church speakers crackled for a fraction of a second, and then Victoria's recorded phone conversation from 2 nights ago filled the vast sanctuary, echoing off the stained glass windows. "Mother, please, just hold on for 2 more days," Victoria's recorded voice boomed clearly, for 200 people to hear. "Once the wedding paperwork is officially finalized, neither of us will ever have to worry about money again. He actually believes I am deeply in love with him, but I could never truly love a man like Andrew. He is far too naive." Several elderly women in the pews gasped in horror, covering their mouths. Victoria's mother collapsed back into her seat, burying her face in her hands. Then came the second audio clip, playing Stephen Medina's cold, arrogant voice, detailing the exact corporate takeover plot. The moment Andrew signs those secondary transfer documents, voting control over 60% of his firm's software patents automatically shifts to our shell corporation. By the time his legal team realizes what happened, the assets will be liquidated. At the back of the cathedral, Stephen Medina realized his scheme was completely exposed. He turned swiftly toward the heavy exit doors, attempting to slip out into the street. However, Mark's 2 undercover operatives stepped smoothly into his path, blocking the doors and pinning him against the wall, until law enforcement officers arrived outside. Victoria sank to her knees, right there on the altar steps, her delicate white veil cascading over her shaking shoulders. Heavy tears streamed down her face, ruining her carefully applied makeup. "Andrew, please forgive me," she sobbed hysterically, reaching up toward my trousers. "I made a terrible mistake. I was manipulated by Stephen. He forced me into this. I swear I love you." I looked down at her, feeling neither anger nor vengeance, only a profound, solemn sorrow for the years I had wasted loving a phantom. "A mistake, Victoria, is forgetting a birthday or arriving late for dinner," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the microphone so the entire congregation could hear. "What you did was a cold, calculated betrayal that you rehearsed and executed every single day for over 2 years." I reached inside my inner jacket pocket and withdrew a thick, white sealed envelope. Inside were certified copies of Mark's complete investigative portfolio, detailed bank transfer logs, legal filings, communication records, and property registry manipulation attempts. I walked over and placed the envelope directly into the hands of Victoria's father, who was standing frozen in tears. "Your daughter didn't just break my heart, sir," I said softly to him. "She attempted to rob my life's work alongside a convicted corporate criminal." I returned to the altar, slowly pulled the gold wedding band from my pocket, the ring I was meant to give her, and placed it gently onto the open holy book before the silent priest. I turned back to look at the weeping woman on the floor and the room full of stunned witnesses. I came here today not to become a victim of a fraud, but to reclaim my dignity. I cannot marry a woman who never existed. Without another word, I turned my back on the altar and began walking slowly down the central aisle toward the heavy exit doors. The sanctuary was in absolute turmoil behind me. Relatives were shouting at Victoria's family, business colleagues were staring in stunned awe, and guests were rising from their seats in complete disbelief. Cameras from several invited local journalists were flashing continuously, recording every second of the dramatic scene. As I pushed through the cathedral doors and stepped out into the bright afternoon sunlight, I took my first clean, unburdened breath in days. Mark was waiting near the steps with a car running. "It's over, Andrew," Mark said quietly as I opened the passenger door. "No," I replied, looking back at the towering stone church one last time. "It's just beginning." Within 48 hours, the video footage recorded inside the cathedral went viral across national social media platforms and regional news networks. The public exposure was swift and unrelenting. Major corporate partners who had been negotiating investment contracts with Stephen Medina immediately severed all ties, launching internal audits that revealed widespread financial misconduct. The district attorney's office opened a formal criminal investigation into Stephen Medina and Victoria for conspiracy to commit grand larceny, wire fraud, and corporate extortion. Within 3 weeks, Stephen was arrested at a regional airport while attempting to board a flight to a non-extradition country. Victoria was formally indicted shortly thereafter, facing severe legal penalties and complete financial ruin. The predatory attorney who assisted them was permanently disbarred by the state legal board. Victoria lost her social standing, her lucrative corporate connections, and the trust of everyone who had ever known her. For me, the months that followed were a grueling journey of emotional recovery and deep reflection. I threw myself back into my technology company, but this time with a renewed sense of purpose and clarity. I restructured my corporate governance, rewarded loyal employees like Samuel who had stood by me during the crisis, and dedicated a significant portion of my firm's profits to local community outreach programs. I spent long evenings sitting on the porch of my late mother's quiet home, learning to unburden my mind from the bitterness that betrayal often leaves behind. I realized that allowing her deceit to make me cynical or paranoid would mean letting her win twice. Approximately 1 year after that fateful day at the cathedral, life moved forward in ways I could never have anticipated. I was sitting in a quiet, unassuming coffee shop located 2 blocks from my software headquarters on a rainy Tuesday morning. That was where I met Sophia. Sophia was an architect who ran a small restoration firm specializing in preserving historic structures. Unlike my previous encounters, our introduction was completely unscripted. She accidentally bumped into my table, spilling a few drops of her tea onto my notebook, and offered a sincere, flustered apology that immediately made me smile. We began talking, first about the restored timber beams of the old coffee shop, then about classic literature, jazz music, and our favorite travel destinations across the country. Sophia knew nothing about my financial standing, my corporate leadership, or the viral scandal that had dominated headlines a year prior. And when she eventually learned about my past, she listened with quiet empathy, holding my hand without offering empty platitudes. Over the months that followed, Sophia proved through her quiet actions, her honesty, and her unyielding respect that true love does not demand grand performances or public spectacles. It thrives in quiet consistency, total transparency, and shared values. Sitting on my back patio one warm evening with Sophia, watching the sun dip beneath the Texas horizon, I held the old gold wedding ring that I had kept in a desk drawer as a quiet reminder of the past. Looking at that cold metal, I realized that canceling my first wedding was not the greatest tragedy of my life. It was, in fact, the precise moment my real life was saved. When we navigate the complex journey of adulthood, we often mistake smooth words and grand gestures for genuine character. We live in a world that frequently rewards illusion, where individuals learn to wear elaborate masks to secure status, wealth, or validation. Yet life has a quiet, uncompromising way of demanding authenticity. True maturity lies in recognizing that trust is not something to be surrendered blindly out of fear of solitude, but a sacred gift reserved for those whose actions consistently mirror their words. Experiencing deep betrayal by someone you cherished leaves a profound scar on the human spirit. It tempts us to build thick emotional walls, to view every new person with cynical suspicion, and to close our hearts to the possibility of future connection. But hardening one's heart is a tragic mistake. To live defensively is to let the betrayer dictate the rest of your story. Resilience is not born from refusing to trust ever again. It is forged by developing the wisdom to discern who is worthy of that trust. As the years accumulate, one learns that material wealth, corporate titles, and public applause are remarkably fragile. They can be built in a decade and lost in a single day. What truly endures is our internal integrity, the peace of a clear conscience, and the courage to walk away from toxic deceit, no matter how comfortable or romantic it may appear on the surface. Painful endings are frequently nothing more than painful beginnings in disguise, necessary reckonings that clear away the rotten foundations so something genuine and lasting can finally be built. Sometimes, the single worst day of your life, the moment when your dreams seem to shatter into 1,000 unrecoverable pieces right before your eyes, is actually the precise day divine providence steps in to rescue you from a lifetime of living a lie. True love never asks you to compromise your dignity, nor does it require you to sacrifice your soul to satisfy another person's hidden ambition. The right people do not enter your journey to exploit your accomplishments. They come to stand alongside you, offering quiet strength through every storm life brings.